Okay, so here we go. Right now we're going to talk about how to write an essay. I'm going to show you an essay from a student in another class. We're going to look at her introduction paragraph. I could have pulled up 20 of these that were good. I just pulled up this one. Let's read this one together. During World War I, the world was struck with the Spanish flu pandemic, which killed many people. It was a devastating time for people in America because as people were dying in the war, there were also people at home dying from a virus. People got complacent. Good word choice. So if you can use your vocabulary and show it off, it demonstrates to the reader that you're intelligent, which lets them err on the side of the rubric of you. Okay? And soldiers returned back home from the World War, and the virus escalated. Good word choice. Well, in March of 2020, lives got shattered and our sense of normalcy disappeared as we got struck with the COVID-19 pandemic all across the world. COVID-19 pandemic is detrimental to one's mental health. COVID-19 has also torn families and friendships apart and has been very detrimental to the economy. In my opinion, that's a perfect introduction paragraph. They assess the question perfectly. What is the thesis statement? Who can read that to me? Who understands what a thesis statement is? What is her thesis statement? It's actually in 2 sentences. What is it? Raise your hand and tell me. Riley.
The last 2 sentences.
Yeah, what are they?
COVID-19 pandemic is detrimental to one's mental health.
Speak up, please.
COVID-19 pandemic is detrimental to one's mental health. COVID-19 has also torn families and friendships apart and has been very detrimental to the economy.
So what should the first sentence of each of the body paragraphs be about? The first one should be about what? Mental health. The second one should be about what? Tearing families and friendship apart, which is true. And the third one should be about the economy. So if you scroll down, you can see perfect topic sentence. COVID-19 has been very detrimental to one's mental health. Scroll down to her second body paragraph. COVID-19 has torn families and friendships apart. Third body paragraph. COVID-19 has been detrimental to the economy. It may sound simple, but it is simple. And that's what I want you guys to focus on, is something that simple. The same blueprint that we can do every time. And that is, write an introduction paragraph with context. Where's her context? Why would I give her 1 context point for what we read? What did she do that gave me context? And what is context? Maddie.
She was comparing it to the Spanish word.
Comparing it to something previous in history. Context is either comparing it to something in the past or to something in the future, maybe in your conclusion or throughout the paragraphs. You with me? So let me give you an example. If your essay is about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his I Have a Dream speech, and you're assessing his impact on the civil rights movement, context would be maybe to talk about the slave trade and the Civil War in the past. Or it might be in your conclusion to talk about George Floyd, or to talk about Barack Obama, or African Americans and things that happen with African Americans in the future. You want to get a context point in a history paper, that's how you get it. In my opinion, and this is an opinion because there's other place to put it, in my opinion, the easiest place to get the context point on the rubric for the long essay or the DBQ essay is in the introduction paragraph. Let me say that again. If you lead in the way I'm going to show you in a second, that's how you're going to get the context point. Katie did a perfect job of that. She led in, and by lead in I mean her first sentence. Does her first sentence give you any clue that she's going to talk about COVID-19? No. That's good. The first sentence should be very general, very broad, not specific. One of the biggest mistakes students on AP long essays make, put the phones away, I see 2 of them. One of the biggest mistakes that AP students, see that'll be taped, see what we have to deal with, I'm teaching in a mask, hot air's blowing on my face, I gotta tell kids to put phones away, 21st century teaching. The biggest mistake that kids make on the AP essay, also in my opinion, is that their introduction paragraph is only 2 or 3 sentences long. That's not long enough. Minimum 4, maximum 8, probably should be 5 or 6. The thesis statement can be redundant, which means you can allude to it, but then specifically answer the question like she did with the prongs specifically. Don't leave anything to the imagination of the reader. You know, the AP rubric says it doesn't have to be in the intro, it can be in the conclusion. Just put it in the introduction. You can restate it in the conclusion. You want to make sure that the person grading it knows exactly what you're trying to prove and what your body paragraphs are going to be about. You know, just like if any of you have a parent or a relative that builds houses, anybody have that? Anybody build houses, contractor, work for that type of environment? Anybody that does any jobs, plumbers, electricians, things like that? Yes. You don't just build the house, right? All that stuff's mapped out. It's called a blueprint. You're going to plan the essay like you've got a blueprint. You need to use the specific mechanical model that she followed. Most of you did, but some of you didn't. And if you're looking at your introduction and it's 1, 2, 3 sentences, it's not long enough. It's too important of a paragraph. And if you're wondering, well, how do I make it longer? With context of the past. Lead into it. So like, if I'm going to write about the Great Depression, and this is just off the top of my head, and the question is, assess this statement. Franklin Roosevelt was effective at resolving the Great Depression. I'm going to start my essay by saying something very general or a quote. I got a quote, actually. I know that Franklin Roosevelt said, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. But what if I didn't know it exact? Then maybe I'd say, I wouldn't quote it, I'd just say, Franklin Roosevelt said, you know, that we don't have to fear anything but fear. And when he said that, my second paragraph would be, he delivered that through one of his messages called Fireside Chats, where he spoke directly to the American people. My third sentence might be, the 1930s saw economic struggles that this country hadn't seen for a long time, or ever before. My fourth sentence might be, Franklin Roosevelt attempted to alleviate those problems by creating a program he called the New Deal. The New Deal was relief for those in need, recovery for the economy, and reform so that this never happened again. Now my thesis statement. Franklin Roosevelt helped Americans psychologically with his New Deal program to usher out the ills of the Great Depression. However, economically people still suffered, in World War II ultimately pulled the United States out of this tragedy, or tragic decade. What's that word I use there? Although. What's the power of the word although in a thesis statement? Anyone want to tell me? Although or but. Why is that word so important? It gives the contradicting point. What does that demonstrate to the reader, to the grader, to the teacher? That you understand what? That you understand what? Both sides of the argument. The tension of the argument. Do you understand what I'm saying? So like, if I said, assess this statement. Jordan-Elbridge cafeteria food is the best. I don't say that, we're taping, it's delicious. They do a great job. The Jordan-Elbridge cafeteria food is the best because it tastes great and it's affordable. Although, since COVID, there's not as much variety. There you go. What are my body paragraphs about? Body paragraph 1 is about the food tasting great. Body paragraph 2 is about the economics of it. Body paragraph 3 is refuting it. If you can use although, use it. In any era. A lot of these prompt questions are set up to argue any multiple varying viewpoint. And when you use although, it's great because it allows you more to write about. Are you following me here? If you want to take some notes right now, get out a notebook or someplace, because I'm going to diagram this for you on the whiteboard. I'm going to diagram this for you on a whiteboard. We'll call it How to Write an Introduction Paragraph. That's the symbol for paragraph, if you ever see me use that in any annotations I had. For AP or SUNY U.S. History class. Maybe we'll make this even better. Let's do how to write an essay. Not an introduction. I'll map out the whole essay. So if I'm going to draw this out for the visual learners, the introduction paragraph would be an inverted triangle, a backwards triangle. Why? Because it goes what?
From the most information to the least.
General at the top, like Katie's topic sentence about the Spanish flu or my quote. And it builds up to specific. The build up, right? You don't just jump right in. The build up. The last sentence, and this is not an absolute, but it's just a preference. The last sentence is called the thesis statement. It is a restating of the question with specifically what the 3 items are going to be about that represent the body paragraph. Let me say that again. The thesis statement is the claim. It restates and answers the question with the 3 main themes or points that will be specifically the 3 body paragraphs. And some of you struggle with that. Some of you don't match up or line up your body paragraphs with what you're trying to prove. You need to. You might even have to go back and change your thesis statement. Is 3 absolute? No, it could be a 2-prong or a 4-prong, not 1. But 3 is a good rule of thumb for us to have 3 points. You know, there's a fallback. One of you did the fallback, by the way. For a lot of these prompt questions, if you can't think of a thesis statement, you can fall back on political, economic, or social. It's like a fallback. And then 1 body paragraph would be political, 1 economic, 1 social. What should be the length of the introduction paragraph? I've told you this. What should it be?
4 to 8 sentences.
4 to 8 sentences. I would say somewhere closer to 6-ish. Then body paragraph 1, 2, and 3. And those are specifically the 3 prongs of the essay. Matching up, lining up perfectly. How long should the body paragraphs be? Approximately. What range?
5 to 7 sentences.
I'd say, for argument's sake, 5 to 8 sentences. For a DBQ, I'd say 5 to 10. For a long essay, 5 to 8. Just a regular essay. DBQ would be a couple more. Why? Because you've got document analysis to lean on. It's like an essay with training wheels. What's the last paragraph called? The conclusion. Why did I draw that, do you think? Because it should go from what? If if I drew that up above, what should the
Go from specific.
specific to general? Specific to general. How long should it be? 2 to 4 sentences. Wrap it up. What should the first sentence of the conclusion be? In my opinion, because this is not absolute, I think it should always be a restating of the thesis. Because you proved it throughout the body paragraphs, didn't you? How do you get the evidence and analysis points on the rubric? In the body paragraphs. How do you get the context point? In the introduction and the conclusion. The goal is to get 6 on the rubric. I realize you got the rubric in front of you. It's hard to get more than 4 because the second analysis point and the second evidence point are tough to reach. You got to really delve deep into it. You got to have, as the curriculum for College Board says, a complex understanding. But you do have that at COVID, and some of you did delve that deeply into it. The question is, are you going to be able to do that for topics we cover all year? Well, that's on you. That's why I'm having you read. That's why I'm the dancing chicken every day up here trying to do this. That's why we're having these discussions. So how long should a long essay be? What's the range? Well, that takes some math, doesn't it? It should be somewhere in the 21 to 32 sentence range, which somewhere in the 25 to 30 is a good gauge if you want to count, if you ever had time to count sentences. That's not long. In fact, this is also often refreshing for kids that say, I never write long essays. I'm not looking for length. In fact, I got one, not in this class, that was about 4 typed pages long. And guess what? I don't want it that long. Why? Why don't I want it that long?
It's not needed.
It's unnecessary, and guess what? If this is all practice, in May 6th, or whatever the date is of the final, is the game, you can't write that long on the game, can you? Because you don't have what?
Time.
Time. It's timed. New York State Regents is timed. The AP exam is timed. And therefore, all our writing this year that we do in class is timed. The midterm's timed. The third quarterly assessment will be timed. You only have 40 minutes, really 35 minutes to write an essay. That'll be the time that I give you. It should take you, in my opinion, if you know your stuff, a half hour-ish. The extra time is time to just add and enhance. If you're taking an hour, you're never going to have that time. If you want to count sentences, because you do have time after, that's a good guide. How does that fall on a double-spaced essay in 11 font? How long should it be? About 2 pages, maybe leaking onto the third, double-spaced. Single-spaced, it might even be on the same page, depending on the font. This is not long. It's not an exercise in volume writing. It's not about writing length. It's about answering the question and filling the points on the rubric and getting to the point and using your language and the command of your vocabulary and the history that you know, the knowledge that you know, and putting it in context so that the reader knows this person knows history. This girl, this guy knows history. This student has context. This is great. I could write an intro paragraph off the top of my head about anything using this framework that I showed you of general to specific. You know what they asked me to do earlier? I'm going to show you it. Marin said, we tried to pick a topic. Chris McGinn picked minimum wage. I was like, I don't want to talk about something that half the class feels one way and half feels the other. And Marin said, fantasy football. So off the top of my head, I wrote an intro paragraph that I did not prepare ahead of time about fantasy football that I wanted to share with you. First of all, we had to frame it in a question. The question was, assess this statement. Fantasy football is amazing. Now, each of you would answer that differently. Some of you might not even know what fantasy football is, and you'd have to do research, and then you'd have to make an opinion, and then you'd be like, I don't know if this is amazing, this is weird. And then you might say fantasy football is not amazing, because it's weird for your first prong, and then your other two, right? Look at my first sentence. When the National Football League was founded almost 100 years ago, that should say ago, no one could foresee how popular it would become, period. What kind of sentence is that? It's very what? Broad, general. Do you know I'm going to talk about fantasy football? No. Am I giving context? Am I going to get the context point with that?
Yes.
Eventually, yes. Because I'm going back. Look what I say next. NFL games are the most watched events in the United States today, which is a fact. The Super Bowl will be the most every year. Is that context point now looking good for me with those two sentences? Yeah, already. I might have already gotten it. Now I got to get the thesis that point too, right? Next one. For many years, gambling enhanced the NFL's popularity. In the late 20th century, however, fantasy football became very popular. Fantasy football allows fans the opportunity to find new ways to enjoy the game. And then I wrote the thesis statement in red. Fantasy football is amazing because it provides entertainment, comma, an opportunity to win money with knowledge, comma, although luck is a huge factor, which if you do fantasy football, you know that that's true. Guy could get hurt on the first play, right? The kicker could go off. Question? Yeah, of course.
Or Kyrie fails with some 2 points.
Yeah, stuff like that can happen. Now listen. Listen. I used although. I could have used but. I argued the other side of the argument, right? You know, the question could have been, assess this statement. The Articles of Confederation were a working form of government. And you could say the Articles of Confederation weren't a working form of government politically or economically, although there were some positives. See how simple this is? It could be any topic you want. You could write it about music, about lacrosse, about marching band, about fashion, about your favorite movie, about your mom. My mom is an excellent mom because she always does things for us, comma, she always keeps the house clean, although she's grumpy. And the third paragraph could be about grumpy. I don't know. Do you get this? Do you see this framework? Does this make sense to you? Excellent. Now let's look at our assignment essay. If all this makes sense, let's go now to our assignment essay. And our assignment essay is this. It's due Wednesday. Instructions. Period 2. It's actually topic 2.3 if you want to be specific. Directions. Write a coherent, well-supported introduction paragraph with a valid thesis statement on the following question. Here's the question. Although both were settled largely by people of English origin, Massachusetts Bay and the Chesapeake region by 1700 had evolved into two distinct, and that means unique and different societies. Why did this difference in development occur? Okay, first thing is we need to understand the question. So let's break some things down. What does it mean that although both were settled by people of English origin? What does that mean? Somebody tell me. What does that mean? What does that mean, what does that mean, Matt?
Both have a lot of English language.
Both were English settlers, at least originally. That's a fact. Now it says by 1700, you should probably know when the dates, around the dates. What are these regions? When was, you need to know the places. When was Massachusetts Bay settled, roughly? When? What years?
1720.
Think again before you speak, you said it wrong. It's got to be before 1700. 1620 was Plymouth, and then north up in the bay were the 1630s. We called that John Winthrop led what? It was the Great Migration. Excellent.
Good job, man.
Look at, so Massachusetts Bay is talking about settlers into that whole region, you know, that's now Boston on the coast, Cape Cod, Plymouth, the people that came there are from England, and yet they're different than the Chesapeake region. When did the Chesapeake region first get settled? What year? We talked about it. What's the big year? The starting year? 1607. Where? Where's the first permanent English settlement in the New World?
Jamestown.
Jamestown. That's in the Chesapeake region. Eventually, settlers will flood into what we now call Virginia and Maryland, into what's called the Chesapeake Bay. Predominantly or originally from England. Are you with me? So how are we going to answer this? Now, Mod 1, I had a student, Porter, he rattled off all these right off the top of his head. I want you to think about this. What are the reasons that make this statement fact? That although they all came from England, why by 1700 did these look like two totally different places? Raise your hand and see if you can come up with some reasons. Nick.
Which one?
Give me one. Nick McKean.
So the Plymouth, everyone was south, was more tobacco, single men. No one that was up north was more family oriented.
Okay, so you just said two of them at once, and that was perfect. Let's break down what Nick just told you, because he told you some truth. He said single men versus family oriented. So obviously that could be one of the prongs or points to your thesis, right? Is the types of family or people that came. You also said south. Is geography a factor? Why? Climate and geography. Soil, growing season. You also said tobacco. So you could use economics, or you could just include that in climate and geography. What's also a factor?
One was very religious and for religious purposes, one was for money.
So purposes, you said, which is also the what? What's the other words for purposes? You could use purpose, or you could use maybe, or you could use motive or reason. Or you could just use religion. You see what we did here? We just answered the question. I gave you a whole number of options. So what should the thesis statement look like? Well, let's all type it and write it together right now, and then that'll be easier when you write this intro paragraph. The thesis statement should say, although both were largely settled by people of English origin, Massachusetts Bay and the Chesapeake region by 1700 had evolved into two distinct societies because of, shout them out, climate, comma, economy, comma, religion or motive or reason or geography, or you combine some of those, and that's called a thesis statement. Do you understand? Now you're like, well, we have to write a whole introduction paragraph, Mr. Kufs. Like, what should the first sentence look like? I don't know. It could be about Columbus. Like, it's context. It's the buildup. Does anyone have any questions? Or do you guys understand this? Because I'm going to let you write this question. This is due Wednesday. I'm going to let you start it right now. And I left you, how much time have I left you? I've left you all of 3 minutes. But you can start it right now. I just gave you the thesis. If nobody has any questions, I'm going to stop the awkward video. Hi.